Hello, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, my quest is to craft a scene from my favorite video game of all time, Stardew Valley. Recently, Boyle Hobby Time's Patreon voted on the theme farm for the next crafting challenge, and well, I think that means it's a perfect time to take a trip back to the valley, so let's get into it. So I want a nice variety of things on this farm, and I think a colorful tree would do just nice. So we'll go with an oak, and then maybe even put some junimos below it. We'll add fences bordering the piece, and then add a pumpkin patch. I'll probably add some other things as I go. I figured that since the fence line will be in the background and bordering half of the piece, it'll make sizing everything else a little easier if I started crafting that and moved forward from there. So I took an X-Acto blade and hobby saw and started making my own miniature Lincoln logs out of balsa wood. I segmented out 2-inch poles with the saw. I then lined them up with the soon-to-be crossbar and made markings with a pencil. After sawing a fraction of an inch into each piece, I carved the incised portion out with the blade. These Lincoln logs were a bit fiddly, until I found the easiest way of assembly, adding wood glue to the notch and then gently sliding the horizontal wooden piece into place. I'm no carpenter, but I'd wager Robin would approve of this weirdly sporadic fence line. I started texturing the balsa wood with really any tool I had on hand that was just harder than balsa, which is pretty much everything. I have an old bottle of Agrax Earthshade that's clearly gone bad when I use it on minis, so sometimes I use it on terrain builds. I did so here. I also found little splotches on the balsa wood that I had to investigate further. One of the things that I realized when I was making this fence post was that if you use excessive wood glue or super glue, when it dries, it creates a sort of shell around the balsa that makes it like impossible to paint with acrylic. If you water down PVA glue and you apply it to the balsa, it'll be much easier to adhere acrylic paint to it after. Anyways, I'll show you those splotches now and let's get back to the video. It is unfortunate that this was on the viewing side of my fence, but I just tried to blend it in with my highlight color after I found out. At this point, I started assembling a Woodland Scenics tree kit. I also sprinkled on some of Diorama Precipice's leaves on it. The realistic look, though, it's not quite what I'm going for. Pixel art with a popping color palette is the Stardew look. And this haunted tree that kind of looks like it's from Fangorn Forest, it may have a perfect place in a future build video, but not here at Craft & Quest Farms. I knew I was going to make another tree and landed on oak because of how lovely the fall variant looks. I added 2 branching wires that fed out of and back into the main trunk. I ran some gray Super Sculpey through my pasta maker and started adhering it to the foil. I initially started with the bark by carving little sections into the clay and then texturing it, but it just didn't have enough variation. So I ended up carving additional channels with a silicone sculpting tool to break up that space. I textured it again, and then also used my glove to texture inside of those grooves. This tree was a big learning process. For the leaves of the tree, I used different colors of Sculpey Primo. I used a cookie cutter, cut sections of the clay out, and then started carving up the leaves. At first this was working well, but then I realized I could kind of streamline the process by not using the cookie cutter. Unfortunately, this left me with inconsistent leaf size, but I think it's kind of cool looking. It's not exactly how the video game portrays the oak tree, but that's okay. When I wanted a change in color as I made my way up the tree, I ran 2 different colors together through my pasta maker and then just repeated the process. This gave me a natural highlight as I made my way up to the top of the oak tree. I think the interplay between the 2 colors on the transitional rows is charming, and I'm happy I did it. I am really happy that I learned how to make this stylized tree, and the next time that I make one, it'll be even better, with consistent leaf shape and size to boot. It wasn't all happy times at the tree, though. There was a storm coming, and unlike Stardew Valley, when that's good news so you don't have to water your crops, this was not good news. The storm came in the form of crumbling clay. When I put this in the oven, it fell halfway through the bake. The tree trunk broke into many pieces and the leaves fell off like the very season demanded it. I also underworked the clay when I was sculpting. My new goal was to put the trunk and the leaves back together like a puzzle, piece by piece. And surprisingly, it worked out pretty well. In my totally calm mental state post-tree collapse, I somehow had the clarity to save all of the fallen pieces. This afforded me the opportunity for some fun 3-dimensional puzzling that I really quite enjoyed, given the circumstances, of course. I once said that air dry clay was kind of like a get out of jail free card. Well, as far as I know, there's no jail in Stardew Valley, unless Gus is harboring some sort of terrible secret in the Star Drop Saloon. Either way, Milliput came to my rescue. Crevices that I could not repair with the fractured pieces were filled with Milliput, then smoothed out to dry and seamlessly blended with the two different types of clay. I textured it in a similar fashion as before. I painted the trunk brown, and then I went to the airbrush, and I gave everything a yellow highlight on top. If you look closely at the oak trees in the game, you can see that there is a splash of yellow highlight on most of the leaves. I then gave a wash to the trunk. After that, I made a scarecrow. But what is this, a scarecrow for a community center for ants? Well, the scarecrow needs to be at least 6 times as big, and while I still need to improve on my clay sculpting skills, I thought that it could be fun to make with foam. So I carved it out on my wire cutter and then started shaving away with sandpaper. I carved incisions with an X-Acto tool, and then widened those incisions. I used a pen to do his little buttons. I gave him a little top hat. In his hands and where his denim overalls end, I carved little holes with my hot wire with the intention of filling it with fake hay. I gave him a coat of black paint and Mod Podge, and then started adding color. Adding shadow to the underside of the hat. Once I was done with those parts, I could get to the fun painting for me, which was doing the denim. I added a dark blue and then just added lighter highlights where I think it made sense. Give him 2 little black eyes. And then I add little bits of gold on the buttons. Once the scarecrow was looking dapper and dry and I could handle him a little more effectively, I added some super glue to the little fake bits of hay, inserted them, and then gave him a trim. I broke out the colored Sculpey and rolled 8 pieces until they resembled the kumquats from my tree out back. I pressed the rounded back of a tool into the top, and then rolled my metallic sculpting tool along the sides, halving the difference between scores each time. I opened up green Primo Sculpey and made cute little stems. I pressed them into place and then moved on to the vines and leaves. While I was finishing this step up, I was really appreciating how vibrant the colors were, but I did decide on adding some shadows underneath the bottom half of the pumpkins, just to add some dimension and interest. I wiped off all the paint from the brush, and then just bristled it to blend it together. After that I made little junimos by rolling blue clay into a ball, and once again indenting the top of them. This time though, I bent some wire with pliers to make hands, feet, and their antenna. If you look closely in game, they have a single pixel of the same color of those on their heads. He needed a friend, so I also made a red one. While the footage of me making this base rolls, I just want to say that if you've never played Stardew Valley, or you're interested in trying it out, I would highly suggest doing so. It's an extremely lighthearted game, and at times it's kind of functioned as a small antidepressant for me. Obviously this is not medical advice or anything, but it's just kind of my experience with the game. I added shadows for the tree, the fences, the scarecrow, and off camera I made a sprinkler, so I needed to make the soil around the pumpkins look wet. The steps leading up into the farm needed a little something extra, so I took some polystyrene sheets and textured them with a wire brush. After that I did light washes over the tops of them, using Agrax Earthshade and Snakebite Leather contrast and shade paints. It took about 10 projects to realize this, but I finally learned that PVA glue is really the superior glue to be using towards the end of a project, just because it doesn't leave that white residue that superglue leaves. And the final major contributor to the piece is the cobblestone path. I took strips of terracotta and gray clay and cut them into about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch long. I smoothed them out with a silicone tool and some alcohol. I textured them with a rock, and then the ones that looked like they could use a crack, I cracked them. After baking in the oven for about 18 or 20 minutes at 275 degrees Fahrenheit, I then gave them a light wash with some black ink. I spread it around and it really seeped into those cracks and the texture that we just did. Once those were dry, I dry brushed with a light gray. Finally, I assembled the diorama with the tree, the pumpkins, the sprinkler, fences, everything. I also added grass tufts and some diorama recipe leaves. With that done, my quest is complete. here are the final shots of the farm. Thanks for watching. There you have it. There's my Stardew Valley diorama. Fall came a little early this year, but that's just because I really wanted to make a pumpkin patch. Overall, I'm really happy with how the build came out. I learned a bunch about balsa and clay, and I think overall my favorite part is the cobblestone path. One of the things that I really want to do is make a winter, spring, and summer additional pieces that all go together like the same size and showcase all of the seasons of Stardew Valley as like a sort of super farm. I think that would be really fun to do. If you want to see that video or any of the other things that I've got planned on this channel, subscribing is the easiest way to do that, and you get notified when I post a new video. Additionally, you can like and comment, preferably comment your favorite farm that you've ever done. One of my favorites that I did, actually is my most recent farm, was a hatchery, where I got all the fish in the game, and I put them all in the little fish ponds, and then put adjacent sheds nearby where I had the fish tanks, and I kind of did like a hatchery showcase, like museum thing. And it was really cool because I did it on the beach farm. Anyways, I really appreciate you made it this far in the video, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time.